Welcome, everyone, to the June 4th edition of the Signals from Mars live stream brought to you by the Mars Attacks podcast. Welcome, everyone in the chat. Jeremy in the UK, Art in New Jersey, and joining me, Mr. Bob Nalbandian. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good, Victor. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I had the pleasure of being on your show a few weeks ago.
That was fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I always think, when I hear you talk about the people you rub elbows with and everything else, it always comes to mind. Why the hell does Bob talk to me? But you've always been a down-to-earth guy, and you've always been very encouraging to me, even behind the scenes when I've had difficulties with health and everything else. You've always been there and very encouraging. So I thank you for all your years of being a friend, in the podcasting world. So,
dude, you're welcome. We're old school, and we've been a part of the community for many, many years. And to me, that's what the metal community is all about. It's about, friendship. It's not about, ego and hanging out, whether or not, famous people or not. It's, everyone in the metal community is an equal, and we're all have the same passion, the same goals, and not just in the metal community, but I think there is a special bond, obviously, with people that, grew up into metal and have the same ambitions and, same kind of, there's just a lot of similarities with everything. And, it's just a good thing. And, I always say I was just, lucky. I was in the right place at the right time, during the early 80s, right in LA and Orange County. And for some reason, I was smack in the middle of a lot of the major stuff that was going on. And but way before they were famous, when, the beginnings of the independent metal scene started cropping up, and, toward the end of the, new wave of British heavy metal, I was on this side of the coast, and I knew all the people there, and I knew all the major players just because of we were all fans then. No one, when we started, no one was rock stars then. We were all like on an equal level, whether it be me or Flagel or Mike Varney. Before they started their labels, everyone, we were just fans. The guys in Metallica, the guys in Armored Saint, we were just all metal fans, So it wasn't like one person was up above. And that's how I kind of look at everyone still in the metal community, where, and when I talk to people like Dave Mustaine or Lars Ulrich, it's still, we're just metal fans. It's like we were talking 30 years ago in their bedroom talking about metal. So it's not really, to me, not much of a difference. On the outside, people might look at it as something weird, but, everyone's the same, man.
Can you ever, looking back, can you ever think of a band that maybe you turned any of those guys onto, where maybe you'll hear like a Lars or a Mustaine talk up a band and say, hey, I was the one that introduced you to that band's music?
That I introduced them to?
Yeah.
I don't know. When I first met with Joey Vera and Armored Saint, Joey and I became real close. Actually, it seems I'm a little bit closer with John now, but we're all like family, all the guys. But Joey and I used to trade. I used to give him tapes of new wave of British heavy metal bands, and I think I gave him tapes of the first Merciful Fate EP, or it might have even been from their demos. I would always make compilations tapes for my friends, and that's what we did. Lars made compilation tapes for us, for my buddy Patrick and I would kind of do the same. You would turn people on to new metal, and so I would make these tapes. So there were a lot of bands, Joey would call, oh man, this band's great, and I remember he called, oh man, this band Merciful Fate, and I mentioned them because now he's playing with them, he's actually doing, but it was funny. He's, I don't know if, I'm sure he probably heard of the band maybe before, but that really was the first time he heard their music. And he's, like, man, that, those songs, those riffs, man, so yeah, I think there's that kind of stuff. And there were a lot of other bands and, people I worked with, like Mike Henry from August Red Moon. I'd always try to get them to go heavier, get heavier here. Here's all the new British metal. And, we're talking 1981. even the Dutch and German metal. I probably even threw some Baron Rojo in there, who knows, but, just different. So they could, kind of see, because, when you were in LA back then, again, I hate saying, pre-internet and pre this and that, but you didn't really know that there was a huge metal scene internationally, and that it was a real heavy scene. So, it was really interesting for, people like that to hear bands out of France and Holland and, Sweden. And it's like, wow, it's, so yeah, I mean, there's definitely, musicians and people I turned on, I probably turned on to a lot of that, like new wave of British heavy metal or European bands at that time.
Yeah. That's cool that you mentioned that. A few weeks ago, I had my patrons came on. We were talking about Iron Maiden, and I wanted to make a point to have one of them who's in the UK, Jeremy, who's actually in the chat right now. And I wanted to talk about, finding out about Maiden and how different it was in the UK growing up and seeing the band rise internally, because obviously you're in England, you're going to perceive, their rise or, what they had going on differently than someone in LA, someone in the New York area like myself. So that's always cool, to find out, to hear different stories about, hey, I heard them because of this, or this DJ played them, or, I played a snippet of Gene Hoglan meeting James Hetfield for the first time, and it was over an Iron Maiden t-shirt.
Yeah, that was from our documentary. That was actually a deleted scene from our documentary, I believe.
Well, I actually have him from way back when, from the classic album series that I did. He tells that same story.
Okay.
So
I remember, I actually know the party he was talking about, because it was a Caton played in his band
right
before LA Chaos. It might have just been Chaos, they were called. And I remember that party, but for some reason I didn't go. But he went. He was like 13, and I knew him back then when he was 13, because his sister was a photographer, and she would take him everywhere to a lot of the concerts and stuff. And I was always jealous of him, because he would go to LA shows, and I was like 3 or 4 years older, and I was. He was going up to the Troubadour and all that stuff at 13, and it was tough for me to get up there from Orange County. But so he would usually tell me about some of the shows he would see, But yeah, Gene's awesome. Great.
Yeah,
dude.
Absolutely. He still holds the record for. I had him on for 5.5 hours, I think. He just kept telling stories and stories and stories. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, you could definitely talk, that guy. Yeah.
Yeah. What was the first band that you felt like a kinship with, or maybe the one that kind of lit the spark for you to say, hey, you know what? I really want to do something within, rock and metal. I want to get involved in the scene somehow.
That would definitely be August Red Moon and Mike Henry, who sadly passed away in 97. He was in August Red Moon, and then in a band called Eden, who I managed. We did one album on Enigma Restless, and then he was in a band called Armed Forces that were on Bizarre Straight Records, and just never had much luck. But at the time he was in Armed Forces, he was dealing with cancer pretty bad, so he was kind of in and out of the hospital. But I'll tell you a quick fun story. I must have been 16 at the time, and this was probably just before I met, like Lars and from Metallica. And, I was going to the Woodstock. I found out about this club, the Woodstock, and back then it was all ages. So I was, I had just, I have to borrow my mom's car, so I'd always have to be back by midnight or whatever. And I just tell them I'm going to a movie, because no way they would want me to go to some, I'm this shady, rock club, and I'd always see Dante Fox, who turned into Great White, and all these cool bands. Max Havoc, a la carte were one of my favorites. They played all the time, and The White, who were a Zeppelin tribute. But I remember at a Dante Fox show, I had just got these patches, and again, we're talking 80, 81 maybe. I had a Jag. This is before the whole denim and leather thing got real big, at least in LA. I had like this nylon kind of jacket, like one of those jackets that coaches wear, those those thin jackets. And I found there was a head shop in Orange County in Costa Mesa that actually had the guy, I guess, was a British guy, and he had patches of Motorhead and Saxon, and
Oh,
you
wow.
couldn't find that anywhere in LA. And
Right.
my buddy told me, I went to the head shop, I got these patches of Motorhead, Saxon, and pins to Iron Maiden, and I had already had Rainbow and Judas Priest, and I thought, man, I'm cool, man. This 16-year-old short-haired, skinny little kid wearing this jacket. And I remember going to the Woodstock wearing this jacket thinking, oh, man, people are going to think I'm cool, man. I'm like this total metal kind of guy. Because, I was just, when Kerrang just came out and I was, looking at all those old photos and, the headbangers, I'm like, I'm going to be like that. And I went to the Woodstock and people were just giving me shit. Like, what the fuck? What are you, some kind of a biker? What the fuck is a Motorhead? You work on cars, and and I'm just like, oh man, and I like kind of have my head down, and then this guy in the concert hall comes up to me, is like, dude, are you from England? And I go, no, I'm from Huntington Beach. He goes, oh man, you got all these patches, like, I read about like all these British headbangers with Motorhead. And he goes, man, how do you know of all these bands? And I'm like, I like lit up. I was like, wow, some guy's into it. And it was Mike Henry from August Red Moon. He wasn't really he knew about all these bands, and he had heard about, Motorhead and Saxon, and boom, we instantly became friends. And that really kind of got me going. And, he was the first guy, just before Lars. And the funny thing is, right around that time, I used to see James Hetfield. And this is before him and Lars got together. Would be at these shows, and he at first he was wearing a Motley Crue shirt, then he was wearing a Motorhead shirt. But I remember he would always kind of stare me down, like when I had my jacket, and I thought, oh, I'd like turn away because I was, oh man, this guy's gonna kick my ass or something. I better And then finally I met with him after I heard that he had got together with Lars, and I said, hey, you're the singer of Metallica, right? And he's like, how do you know, man? We haven't even played a gig yet. I go, well, I met your drummer, Lars. I went to his house. He's got this great metal collection. And he goes, yeah. He goes, dude, I see you all the time. I always like checking out your jacket, And I'm going, oh, man, I thought you were like staring me down, like you want to kick my ass. We just laughed, And it was just, it was cool. But that was like right around that time. So that was just such a cool time because it was like the beginning of, this kinship about this British metal, which kind of brought brought everyone together. But since then I became real close with August Red Moon. They were always my kind of my band that I always pumped. And then I got into Armored Saint shortly after. I saw one of their very early club shows and was just totally blown away. And then I would trade all those. We'd make live tapes and I'd send them to all over England and magazines, Art Shock, and people on Metal Forces, and all the pen pals I had, and get the buzz rolling and get all these, and they loved it. That they wanted you to send their bootlegs out, because it got them exposure. And, even back then doing the demo tape costed, a few $100, which was, a lot of money back then. So I would just bring in a big ghetto blaster, record the concert. And, within a month, all the hardcore metalheads all over the world had a copy of their tape. It was insane the way that network worked. So it was a good time. Yeah, it was definitely fun.
Did they ever give you a hard time over recording shows?
No. They always wanted me to, it was funny because I'd bring the, because back then, we're talking, like I said, 81. I don't know if you remember, I don't know what they call them. They used to call them ghetto blasters.
Yeah.
And they're huge, and they take like 8 like D batteries or whatever, those giant batteries. And within an hour or two, the batteries would wear out. and it would go fast, the speed would go fast. So sometimes I would go, do Armored Saint or August Red Moon, and the opening bands, oh dude, can you record us? So I record them, and then by the headlining band, I didn't know then, but after I got home, I listened to the tape, it's all speeded up, and I'd be like so pissed off, why did I record the opening band? But no, but everyone wanted, they knew I kind of had a reputation, I guess, back then of recording bands and getting them exposure. And, they were getting, little things in Art Shock and Metal Forces and, reviews. So everyone wanted it to happen. It's not like today at all,
Okay. I'm starting to hear some echo. Let's see. Yeah, that's interesting because I remember hearing way back in the day, one of the first people that I ever came in contact to that was remotely part of the LA scene was Kevin Estrada. And he was working at Hollywood Records back then. Okay. And it was funny. He would tell me his stories about sneaking in to see Van Halen play and how, he'd have to sneak the camera in and how he'd have to sneak, the rolls of film in and out, and that he had gotten caught several times. So hearing you tell that story about the Ghetto Blaster, that's why I was asking if there was ever any issues, because
the clubs didn't care. Well, this is the I mainly did it at the Woodstock. I never went to the Whiskey or the Roxy. They might have had. They were a lot more strict. The Hollywood clubs with the Woodstock, they could give a shit. That was a great thing about that club. It was all ages. I remember I used to drink beer at 16, 17. I'd have just the guys buy me a beer, and sometimes they'd just catch you. Hey, you're too young. Don't be there. Just grab the beer away, and I just get another one. It wasn't like they'd kick you out or that's just how it was back then. And it was just cool, man. It was very laid back, and they didn't care. They kind of encouraged it, as cool, Bob, make sure you put the Woodstock, that was recorded at the Woodstock, and whatever. But there's still a lot of those tapes, I think, floating around somewhere in the tape reader list.
I have to check through my old bootleg cassette collection if there's anything that's from the Woodstock in California. Maybe you originally recorded it, and I have the 15th generation copy.
And I don't even have most of them. There's a great one of August Red Moon from the Woodstock and also from the Concert Factory. There are a couple Woodstock ones I recorded of Armored Saint very early on. There's a few of them out there.
Yeah, real quickly here, there's someone in the chat saying hello to Bob. Unfortunately, due to Facebook's regulations, unless you go to this link, chat.restream.io/Facebook, we can't see who you are. So that's good old Facebook and their rules. So if you want to let us know who you are, do that, or just say, hey, I'm so.
I'm looking at the chat room now. You got quite a few people. Brad Dahl, Jeremy Weltman. How you guys doing? So,
cool. We have a bunch. We have a good crew of guys that come back week after week and enjoy what we do. And I mentioned that you were coming on, and they were all thrilled. So, you brought up August Red Moon, and obviously they were featured in Inside Metal, a great series of documentaries that you started. How, looking back, how much did it mean to you to include bands like August Red Moon and Snow, and bands that maybe, didn't get to the level of an Armored Saint or a Metallica or Megadeth, to kind of get their name back out there again, to try to, fuel people's interest in them again? How much did you purposefully do that when you started this series?
It meant a lot to me. And I wanted to, when I originally got together with Joe and Warren, Warren is the person behind Metal Rock Films. The Metal Rock Films was started from Inside Metal. He's done a bunch of DVDs, a lot of conspiracy kind of DVDs. He's or movies and back then I don't know if it was streaming when we started. It was like 2012, but we had a really good conversation, and we fought a lot because he, obviously he wanted all the name bands, and it's like, look, I want to start from the beginning. No one's touched the Starwood era, that Van Halen era, and all that. And my whole thing was to get the bands that were popular then, because as the bands like Snow and Smile and Quiet Riot and Van Halen, they were all on the same level. They were all headliners, at the Starwood and all these different clubs. So I wanted to bring the viewer back to 1978 or whatever when we do these discussions, and that was a main thing for me. And and I fought pretty hard with Warren about some of the stuff we were doing, but then he saw like a rough edit of the first movie, Pioneers of LA Hard Rock and Metal, and he like flipped out. He goes, dude, I won't question you again. This is really good, So, and we included, of course, Dave Meniketti, because he was a big part of that scene. Lars, because he had just come over from Denmark, and so we had the big name guys in there as well. Stephen Piercy, Chris Holmes, and all that. But, again, I wanted to, I know there was a lot of artists and bands that people were not familiar with, but I definitely wanted to include them because not only were they big on the scene, but they were very influential to me. They were like some of the first local metal bands that got me into that whole local metal scene, prior to, Armored Saint and Metallica and, Rat and Motley Crue and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Cool. And I've always said this, what really appeals to me about the entire series and pretty much every documentary that you've worked on is that it's done from a standpoint where there are other named people that have put documentaries out there and they have to be involved. You're there, but you let them tell their stories. Whoa, Bob just checked out.
Okay. I'm sorry. My fault. Yeah. There we go.
Yeah. So it's, I've always liked the fact that you've let the people you're interviewing and you've let their stories be the focal point of what you do. And you let those stories tell, you bridge everything together and let that all tell this underlying story of how these different scenes all came together. You don't need to be the guy in the middle saying, well, my opinion is this. Well, my opinion is that. No, we're kind of getting it from the horse's mouths where they're telling their piece of the puzzle, basically. And you mentioned Joey Vera before. I'll always remember Joey talking about how they got into early Def Leppard and how that influenced them and how, you're talking about the new wave of British heavy metal stuff and how all of that really little by little helped cobble a lot of these pieces together and what different bands did. And even with the Van Halen and Starwood stuff, how that obviously, influenced what came after that. Did you purposely go into it thinking, I don't need to be the center of attention. I just want to make sure that people understand what I lived through?
Absolutely. That was my goal from the beginning. And, so many documentaries have an agenda,
right.
To tell this storyline. And I always use the example of like the VH1, movies that they used to do. And it would always be, they would have, everything's great, the band's partying, then tragedy strikes. And then
right.
And they would always have the same plot. I mean, the same thing going. And my whole thing is I want to tell the history. Mine is more from a History Channel, Discovery Channel, just the real roots of the history. And I never interviewed the band really. I get them, we meet with them and we just start talking, having a conversation. Right. And it's funny because so many of the artists that I didn't know or I didn't know very well. Some of them were hesitant because a lot of these guys are saying, there were so many people that said they were going to do a documentary and nothing ever happened, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, this is going to happen. And, once I started talking to them and they realized that, I was a part of that whole scene, then they opened up and then they'd be talking for an hour or two. And,
right.
We had the camera rolling. So it wasn't a Q&A kind of thing. It was like, just tell your story. I would bring up something about, oh yeah, I remember that show at the Starwood, or you did that show with Van Halen. Then they'd go off and talk about that show or whatever. So that's what I wanted to do. So there's a lot of editing involved. As you know, Carl, I believe you had Carl Alvarez on one of your shows. He was my for the early Inside Metal titles. He was very involved with me, and of course Joe Floyd, from Warrior, who was the cameraman. He's the one that initially got me involved, and a producer as well, that filmed everything. And it was great having Joe involved because everyone respected the fuck out of Warrior, from Stephen Piercy to everyone. They would all say, dude, you were the greatest. We all strived to be like Warrior, the killer metal band, and they all kind of felt bad that the band never did anything. And Joe's just such a cool, humble guy, and he's a guitar manufacturer. So when it came to like equipment, I mean, he's very successful with his guitar company now. But he's been involved in that, so he could talk, musician stuff with these, with people like Greg Leon, who builds guitars and stuff. So everybody knew Joe too, so that was a really good plus. It's like, oh, Joe Floyd's involved. Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, we love Joe. He had, Silver Cloud Studio that he produced a ton of bands, and it's always a good team. And, all throughout the whole people we had from, Joe and Carl to Curtis Donvito, who did a lot of the editing. To Robert that did a lot of the editing on a couple of the titles, and of course the guys in Reality Check TV who did the Bay Area titles with us. So we always had a team of metalheads, and that kind of grew up in that era. So they knew we all came from the same school basically. So
right,
and that was always a plus.
Cool. Let's talk about the Bay Area Godfathers. I personally ordered volume 1 and 2 tonight. So hopefully they're supposed to come later this month. I have every documentary that you've released, so I needed to keep completing the collection. And I enjoy them. I think that they're good. I wouldn't blow smoke up your ass and just say, "Oh yeah, they're great, Bob." No, I watch these, as the music junkie that I am, and absorb everything that these, these stories and everything. I love it. I love everything that you've done so far. How does Bay Area Godfathers differ from what you've done in the past? Do you feel that it differs at all? You just mentioned that the team is slightly different.
Yeah, I mean, we always kind of keep the same format in a sense, going back from kind of the earlier year, like late 70s. And, obviously the LA titles, we split in three titles. And as you know, each title has 2 parts, 2 volumes.
Right.
We have the Pioneers of LA Hard Rock and Metal, LA Metal Scene Explosion, the Rise of LA Thrash Metal. Of course, Bay Area Godfathers is just one 2-volume titles. So
right,
we crunch a little bit more in there together, but I think we still try to capture the whole picture from not just the thrash scene, which is so, relevant in the Bay Area and what most people, consider, was the Bay Area sound, but there was so much more to that. So we've got a lot of power metal, glam, just traditional progressive rock and metal was huge, in the early, before Metallica came and the thrash metal thing started. That was going back to like Journey and Santana and bands like that, and the 60s, that whole proggy kind of movement was filtered over into the early 80s, and then it kind of got into thrash. But there were a lot of different diverse types of music in the Bay Area, and we tried to capture as much as we could. And again, I wanted to get people, since I'm not from the Bay Area, I want to get people that were involved in that scene and that grew up on that scene. So my good friend John Stranansky, who I've worked with for many years in the 80s with his magazine Metal Rendezvous, he lives in Texas now. He really wanted to get involved, and he was kind enough to get me in contact with everyone. He flew down to here in the Bay Area in San Jose, and we met on several different occasions, several weekends, and interviewed people. And of course, as I mentioned, Reality Check TV, Danny Shipman, my co-editor, he knew a lot of these guys. So he did his own little interviews of a lot of these people. And he knows the scene, backwards and forward. And, Hugh did a lot of the final editing and stuff. So it was a good team. Again, I had to get I wanted to get, my thing is I want to make it as authentic as possible. And as much as I knew about the San Francisco bands, I knew about all those bands, even from LA, because I was a tape trader. I had even those early albums, Broke His Helm and, all those kind of Vicious Rumors, all that stuff when they first came out, all the US metal albums, but I wanted people that grew up in that area to be my, co-producers. So, it would be authentic, so to speak. And I think we captured it. I think it was good. I mean, it's, obviously there's a difference between the LA and Bay Area scene. I think I would have liked to have gotten a little dig a little deeper and it's maybe like Montrose and maybe some of the earlier Sammy Hagar and some of the those late 70s bands.
Right.
But we kind of we got Y&T and Mike Varney, who was a crucial part of that scene in the late 70s and early 80s. So I think it's a very similar format to the LA things, but just definitely a different vibe in the Bay Area for sure.
Yeah. Anything that surprised you when you started interviewing people? Any stories or anything that kind of jumped out at you? I mean, at this point, with everything that you've already done throughout your career and the other documentaries that you've done, I'm sure it's hard to probably shock Bob Nalbandian in 2021. But was there anything that kind of stood out to you, like a kind of, oh, I didn't know that, type of a deal?
Well, nothing really shocking. I had heard stories, of course, and then doing the interviews, we really got confirmation. And I think, again, I like to say the cool thing about these documentaries is, they kind of go back in history and these guys are looking back in time about what happened. So, if you compare something like this to something that was made during the time, like a, Decline of Western Civilization 2, that was made in like 87, 88, when that scene, LA scene, and that whole hair metal and metal scene was going on, everyone's going to act, on ego and all this. And I think now everyone kind of looks back and, they could look back at, oh, some of this was silly. They matured. People mature,
right.
As you know, in the Bay Area, there was a huge thing against, the poser metal and the glam metal and all that. So a lot of these artists, from Exodus to Testament to all these bands, they were saying, hey man, secretly we were huge fans of, especially the guitar players,
right.
As the Warren DeMartinis, the George Lynch, and even Eric Peterson said, I was a huge Motley Crue fan. I know it wasn't cool back then and wasn't cool to say back then, but I used to, be into this. So, I think there's more of an honesty where back, if I had done that even 20 years ago, they probably wouldn't have admitted, oh no, I was all pure, So I think there's more honesty, and it's just kind of like, So again, it wasn't shocking, but it was good to get kind of that confirmation of it is true that it was really, and of course, Davey Vane was, they all had a huge respect for him. He produced the Death Angel, and he was one of those guys who was ultra glam. I mean, as glam as you get, but at the same token, he was very cool with these people. So, I think, that was kind of a cool thing to get out of it.
Yeah, that was actually, I was going to bring up Davey because of that, because he worked so much behind the scenes with a lot of these bands, and then he goes out to do his own stuff. And as you said, I mean, very few people probably had bigger hair than him in that whole, area. So it's kind of interesting. And I remember years ago, I'm trying to think what band it may have been, but it was definitely a thrash band that Eddie Trunk was interviewing one night, when I was a teenager, and it was someone from the Bay Area. I don't know if it was someone from Testament, or it could have been Testament because of, the whole Megaforce connection. But it was funny because they talked, the question was, what do you guys listen to on the bus? And they said, well, none of the other members of the band will cop to this, but we listen to a lot of Y&T. We listen to, and he started listing off bands that were quote unquote weren't cool. And he said, well, I won't tell you who's playing this tape, but this is in our rotation on the bus. And, more than one of these bands, you won't hear anyone say that they listen to them. So it's funny, hearing that all these years later, hearing that they'll actually, that it's not a big deal, because, those were some monster players, DeMartini and Lynch.
Absolutely.
I mean, whether you were into their music or not, they did a lot of stuff that changed a lot of people's, playing. There's, I mentioned this to Chris Aiken when I interviewed him a few weeks ago. Mark Morton of Lamb of God put out a solo album, I think 2 years ago at this point. And there's a song where I've always said it's the best Dokken song not recorded by Dokken. And of course,
Mark Morton did?
Yeah, there's
Oh, really? Wow.
yeah, it's ridiculous. It sounds so much like Doc, and he sounds so much like George Lynch on this track, and
Wow.
just the way that the bridges and choruses are. But of course, how it was built up in the press when it came out, the usual sites that that we know that don't want to admit to that music ever having an influence. Oh, this is some great blues rock. Like, bullshit. Just say it's fucking 80s hard rock. What's the problem with that?
Yeah, yeah.
It
It still
kind
gets
of silly.
that negative name. But it's funny you bring up Y&T because they were kind of like Van Halen in LA.
Right.
No matter how cheeseball they got with like David Lee Roth, and Y&T kind of got cheesy with the Summertime Girls, which I think they'll readily admit. They always had the respect from, because all the people in the Bay Area, that was their go-to band growing up.
Yeah.
Whether you're from Exodus or Testament or Vane or whoever they were, and so they always got mad respect, which they deserve, because Dave Metachetti, as far as a frontman, guitarist, vocalist, he can get better than that, and he influenced so many people in that scene, and they busted their ass, since 1974. A lot of people don't realize. So yeah, bands like that will always get the mad respect, but there's other bands that that don't get as much respect, or that people will never admit to liking. But I think now it's they're to the point where, like, nah, who gives a shit? It's not.
Yeah.
But
yeah, absolutely. With these last two volumes, do you feel that you've improved anything from, say, the production value, or anything from a technological standpoint, as opposed to the previous volumes that you've released?
No, I mean, production. No, I'd laugh because a lot of people say it might have even been a little worse on this. But we know our whole thing with the filming and the stuff. I kind of like that guerrilla kind of filming. Like I said, Danny, I didn't. I had my guy. It was kind of tricky because I had people in LA, because I'm from LA. I had like Carl and Joe were my the camera guys, and they were always pretty much available. And then I had a couple other side camera guys in LA I could call on. But up here, I had my partner Alex Gray, who was the camera guy, who's a professional camera guy, so all the real pro looking stuff he did. But he worked for the ABC News Channel out here, so he's busy all the time, so I couldn't get him all the time. So Danny did a lot of his stuff just with his. He was supposed to get Hugh and the whole pack and get audio and everything, but a lot of the stuff he just did with his camcorder with an open mic, But like with a Stone Vengeance and a Leather Leone and a few of the other artists. But I kind of dug it. It kind of worked because I don't like just a regular talking heads where everything's all perfect and people are made up. It's, you got the same thing, I mean, he did some great stuff with, members of Death Angel and other bands, right off the stage, and just kind of more just spontaneous kind of interviews, which I always think are cool. So I dig it. But, a lot of people, when it comes to, QC, and in fact, we've been having some issues, as you might have known, why I'll tell people now why part 2 isn't streaming yet. We had to fix some audio issues. It went to DVD, that was fine, but a lot of these, like iTunes and Amazon, they're strict about certain audio things, so we had to go back in and fix some stuff. So they will be streaming soon for Bay Area Godfathers Part 2. But anyway, to get to your point, I didn't really look at it to make it, it's not a huge budget series, as you know, we don't. But I kind of, to me, it's not about the quality of the filming. It's more about the quality of the interviews and the insight and what they bring to the table. And we kind of tried to make, especially like the when we did the first one, Pioneers of LA Hard Rock and Metal, we wanted to kind of give it that 70s vibe. And that's why we were so fortunate for that. We had got, people from Snow and Smile and other bands and a la carte. They had old great footage from the Starwood, film footage. Quiet Riot, Dave Forrest, the Quiet Riot's old manager, had great footage with, Kevin DeBro and Randy Rhoads, and so we were able to use that. So we wanted to kind of give it that vibe, because I love watching 70s documentaries when they have that kind of vibe, whether it be a music documentary or you know, a skateboard documentary like that, the Dogtown Roads of Dogtown, what had all that old footage from, because you know, I grew up in Huntington Beach, and I remember in 1978 and 77 when Stacy Peralta and Tony Alva, they were like gods to the surf community where I lived, and the skateboard community. I mean, they were in Venice, but Huntington was also a big surf skateboard town, and they had all that old footage of the pool, and they kind of made it like a 70s, you know, it brings you back to the 70s. And a lot of people, which was the best compliment, you know, told me the same thing, especially with Pioneers and some of those old movies that just brought them back to that era, you know, and that's kind of, you know, it's that good feeling you get. And I think same with Bay Area Godfathers, you know, of course, you know, Reality Check had great footage. Unfortunately, they didn't have footage from the early 80s. Most of it was from early 90s and stuff, but you know, we still were able to use a lot. You know, it was still when, you know, the Stone and the Omni and all these clubs are still around, so we still got a lot of footage from Ruthie's and places like that. So you know, it was cool, but you know, that's always a difficult thing, is to find good old footage that you're able to use. And of course, like I said, we don't have a big budget, and a lot of people wonder why we don't use original music. It's because licensing fees cost so much for music. So that's why we had, you know, Ralph Vieira, who you might know from, he does a lot of podcasts, and he also Almost Human and different other podcasts he does on YouTube. And he's got a great band, Thrash or Die, who sound very much like an early Bay Area thrash metal band. So artists like him and tons of other artists that are friends of mine that had demo tapes that they own the master tapes to everything. They contributed music for us, really, basically for free, just for credit, which I'm very thankful for. Throughout the whole Inside Metal series, we were able to get some really good music. And then some of the stuff, we were able to get some of the original demos and stuff that people, we just couldn't use licensed music. So, you know, we had to make the most of what we could get, and I think we did a good job.
Yeah. And that's an interesting, or a very important point. It's something that I've tried to kind of hit home with some people that have wanted to put out, like, you know, different like video content or whatever. People are so used to seeing stuff on their cell phones nowadays, you know, so even sometimes maybe people overthink when it comes to presenting some of this stuff. I think what you're saying is great, given, you know, catching people coming off stage with a camcorder that isn't 4K or something just like over the top, because it kind of gives you that feel to, you know, the sweatiness of coming off stage, to what it was like back in the day, where everything didn't have to be like you were talking to the guy in the room next to you. You know, it kind of helped build that aura up.
I agree. And we kind of, you know, we wanted that vibe. And even though, you know, now and more, there's more and more people doing these kind of documentaries, and it's getting kind of saturated. So I think a lot of these streaming companies have to be more strict about their QC, their quality control issues, as far as, you know, when it comes to audio and video. But, you know, I do like that guerrilla kind of vibe about it. And I think it kind of, especially when it comes to thrash and something that's supposed to be underground and dirty and not slick and not, you know, all glossy and stuff. You want to give it that dirty kind of edge. And that's why I think I said, not that the production value was any worse, so to speak, on this, but we try to keep that true grit of the, you know, that Bay Area kind of thrash, not just the thrash, just the grittiness of the Bay Area back in the 80s. You know, we want, again, to kind of bring that viewer to the vibe of what it was like living back then, you know, in 1984 or whatever, or 83, you know. So that was always something important to me.
Cool. Let's talk about the podcast. You had me on the other day, and I realized that this month, 12 years that I've been podcasting. I didn't, you know, I knew it was somewhere over 10, but I didn't know exactly how much. How long have you been doing Shockwaves for?
As far as a podcast, Well, I started as a podcast. I was doing stuff with Hard Radio,
Right.
just on their website. And then Tracy Barnes from Hard Radio asked me, "Hey, are you familiar with podcasts?" And this was probably around 2004 or 5. And I said, no. And then, a couple other people, my friend Bill Hale and a few other people were telling me about podcasts. Oh, go to iTunes. There's, I found, Talking Metal had just started and the Rock and Roll Geek Show. And I'm hearing other podcasts. And Tracy's going, why don't you consider starting a podcast? I said, okay, I don't have a clue. If you want to, I could put it together, we started doing it. And he, back then, as you may remember, on iTunes, you had to do all this coding. It was a bit, you couldn't just go on a network like a Spreaker or an Anchor and boom, they could put it on. You had to code everything. It was very difficult to get on these things, but Tracy knew how to do it. So that got me into the Shockwaves Hard Radio podcast, which are just straight up interviews. Then I was doing stuff on that, like we were going through album reviews, like with our album catalogs, like Judas Priest and Deep Purple, and I'd always have Martin Popoff and Monty Connor, who I've known for years, and because they were always just a fun team, because they would always argue and stuff. And we did a couple of those, I think, on one or two, maybe, on the Shockwaves Hard Radio. And then Monty said, hey, we could put you on our website. We do, at the time, they were doing Blabbermouth. They were hosting Blabbermouth and a couple other things. Because we could host a thing. And I said, again, I go, dude, as long as you produce it, I'll just give you the audio. And if someone can do it, because I don't know anything about that technical shit. He said, sure, no problem. So that happened, I think, around 2007 or 8. Okay. I would have to go back and look, but that's when we started the Shockwaves Skull Sessions. And my whole thing for the Skull Sessions, because I was kind of sick of just doing the straight up interviews. There's only so much you could say, so much you could talk to. And then, of course, when, somebody comes out with a new album, whether it be a Judas Priest or a smaller band or whatever, all the podcasts would, interview these guys at the same time. And then you would all put out a lot of the same questions, a lot of, it's like, let me do something different. Let me do, I wanted to start a discussion style thing where it's, 2 or 3 people or more, whether we go through a catalog or whether we talk about a certain topic, whether it be about the business side of music or just a fan based episode about, thrash metal or Metallica or whatever, I just thought it'd be fun. And that's when I kind of started that. And then all of a sudden, a lot of these other podcasts started doing these discussion style stuff, after I started doing it. But, but it was fun. And I keep it going. And again, it was never, I never looked at it as a means of business. Of course, it's nice to make a little money. I mean, we've had some, some sponsorships. Well, when I started, it was funny because back then, before social media and all that, when I started the podcast with Hard Radio and we had the website going, we could get some sponsors to record labels would actually sponsor, but again, that was before the social media and all that. So they had no other avenues of, that. So that was kind of fun. I was making a little bit of money, but then after that, I was just like, it's not about the money. It's just about, it's a hobby. I missed it, and then it's funny when around 2012, I stopped doing the Shockwaves Skull Sessions. And that was around the time, I think, Warner brought out Road Runner. So it was a perfect timing because I didn't have time because I was doing the documentaries. And just recently, as you know, not even 2 years ago, I guess, Matt kept hitting me up. Matt was a big fan of the Skull Sessions from way back from when it first started. And we've been in touch. And since I moved up here to San Jose, he lives in San Lorenzo. And he goes, dude, I got a little studio. Like he kept hitting me, let's get the podcast going. I'll produce it. You do it, it'll be fun. And I said, yeah, I miss doing it, man. It was fun. I said, let's do it. So that's when we started up again. So yeah, it works out good.
Cool. Well, what kind of a dynamic do you think that Matt brings to the show that you feel that you previously didn't have on your own?
Well, it's cool because he comes, he's Coast. He's a little bit younger than me, quite a few years younger. So he grew up on that New York scene, primarily like the hardcore scene. And he had a label.
Right.
He had a great label called No Joke Records. He had a lot of great bands, but it was just the worst timing. Early 2000s. It was during the whole time when they were, the streaming was taking over. He was all old school, had all the CDs and stuff, but he had some good bands, and he had a good sense of business and what to do. But it was a difficult thing for him. But he always kind of liked the podcasting thing, and he, again, I like that contrast because not, I think one of our first ones we did together was with Paris from the Cro-Mags.
Okay.
We did a 2-part interview, which was great because I was really into the Cro-Mags. I remember when that Age of Quarrel record came out. I was like, God damn, this is cool. It was different, like a really cool thing. And so I was into that, and he's really into that. He really knew that whole scene. So he kind of brought that, and I kind of wanted that contrast because, as I mean, I'm 56 now. I'm an 80s metal guy, and even going back to the 70s, late 70s, but grew up during the 80s. So I kind of, I try to keep up with a lot of the current metal, but since the 90s came around, the grunge and alternative, I got, I really got into, like Soundgarden and Alice in Chains when they first came out, but into mid 90s and whatever, it was like, I just go back, listen to my 70s records in my 80s. Things just started to repeat itself. And so I never got into, but then, by knowing Matt and other people like that, he would turn me on to some bands that, I might have been unaware of at the time. So that's always kind of cool to fall back on that. And of course, as he also does Aftershocks with Chris Aiken, and that's more of a straight up interview kind of thing. So, which is cool about them is that podcast is they really expose new talent because, we got so many people, Shockwaves Skull Sessions, like newer bands. It's like, that's really not our thing. We try to keep that more of a classic metal. Because that's my thing. I mean, I'm not going to, and no offense to a lot of bands, but if I don't know a lot about it, or if it's not a passionate thing for me, it just doesn't work for me. I have to, it's got to be something cool. And I think there's a lot of different outlets for newer bands like Aftershocks and that kind of thing. And another thing, I think, not to have any disrespect for a lot of the newer artists, but they don't have that history, or that it's almost like they're programmed on what they should and shouldn't say. And, now everything's so different. And, you talk to, classic rockers from the 80s, they got stories to tell for days. And, you got some of these new guys in, and, it's just kind of, basically the same routine kind of. You can't really, there's not a lot of history to talk about because, they're fairly new, and, then you get a lot of people, be publicists or whatever that, tell them what to say, or, or they try to hit you up, I'm sure you've had that, don't talk about this. And it's like, come on, So, I don't play that game because, that's not my thing. So, I just like to keep it fun and do it like that. So, as you do too, I know.
Yeah. Well, much like you were saying before, I like to just have a good conversation with somebody. At the end of the day, just talk about music, talk about just something that I think is entertaining for everyone involved in, in the conversation. And like you said, when Udo comes up to be interviewed, 40 people are interviewing him for the podcast. So, and
I love
what
Udo,
else can you really
he
cover?
Really, and I don't know if it's more a language barrier too, but he doesn't really talk too much interesting stuff, even though he's got a big history. I always try to get back into the history of stuff, but there's a difference between Udo and, as you say, a guy like Gene Hoglan, who you could talk to about hours, who's got, no filters when it comes to talking about history or talking about him being a fan. And he's a guy that will readily admit, I mean, he was a huge fan of, he grew up with the drummer for A La Carte was his big influence, Brian O'Brien. He learned a lot from Brian and from Tony Richards, from Dante Fox. He was a huge Dante Fox fan.
Yes.
And stuff. And he's not ashamed to talk about that. That's the thing about Gene is he's unabashed. He's honest. He's like, he doesn't care. He doesn't care what people think. So
I asked Jack Russell about Dante Fox, and different things that Gene had brought up as a result, because we had kind of gotten off track talking about, well, he talked about different LA bands, and he was saying, you know, a lot of these bands were better on the demo than they were once they finally got into the recording studio and someone tried to, you know, polish them up. But, you know, when I brought that up to Jack Russell, I said, you know, what's the difference? You know, what do you feel is the biggest difference between Dante Fox and Great White? And he just says, well, we had hits in Great White and we didn't in Dante Fox, so we must have not been that good. I'm like, okay. But I've seen him lately. He wears a Dante Fox shirt every now and then.
I mean, there's a little bit of controversy, I guess, between Kendall and him, because I guess he reissued all those old Dante Fox demos on one of those retro labels. I can't remember, and I heard online, God damn, I haven't heard these songs in years, and they were a bit polished sounding. It was like, God, I don't remember them sounding, because live. You know, it's funny back then, and this is something I talked to Brian O'Brien with a la carte. It was like, man, you know, live, you guys were so good. They were like comedians. They were just so tight and so raw, and so, you know, they came out way heavier. And on demo, everything was kind of slick. But that's in the early '80s. It was all about that slick production. It was, you know, before you had, you know, even the Michael Wagners, and nowadays everything's pushed to the limit. You know, back then it was. All the producers back in those days, you know, metal was new. So they were all like jazz or prog. I mean, you even listen to old Priest albums like, Hellbent for Leather or Stained Class. It's very slick. You know, the guitar is very clean. It's not, you know, rough. And that's how, even though it sounds great I couldn't see those albums being produced with a modern production today. It would ruin it, because that was like prog. It was almost as prog as it was metal. The early Judas Priest, Sin After Sin, Stained Class, very proggy, and his voice was just so crystal clear. But you know, nowadays it's all beefed up. But when it comes to more, you know, mainstream rock and metal bands, sometimes it gets too polished, and it just, you know, it just doesn't capture their live, you know, feelings. So that's why I always look about live albums. You know, I mean, those '70s live albums, whether it be you know, Strangers in the Night, Unleashed in the East, or, you know, Live and Dangerous, or, you know, any of those classic live albums, Foghat Live, they're so much better, I think, the music than the studio, because they just go off. And, you know, that's how I think it was kind of on the local metal scene. I mean, you know, and it even filters back to a lot of the '80s. When I was like the first Armored Saint record, way too polished. You know, March of the Saint, you know, and they'll say that as well. You know, we could go on and on about production, but
that's funny though, because how many live albums broke those bands in the '70s? You know, for that specific reason. You know, you look at any one of those you mentioned, or even, you know, Motorhead's No Sleep Till Hammersmith, Kiss Alive, Cheap Trick Live at Budokan. I mean, those were the albums. Peter Frampton, you know, Frampton Comes Alive. These are all the albums that made those artists.
Performance, I mean, so many of them,
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. We have a question in the chat. Let's see if I understand this correctly. Who band or artist most pleasantly surprised you? You went on stage with this, and they turned out to be a powerhouse. Not sure I understand the question.
I went on stage with it, or when they went on stage?
I guess when they went on stage.
Oh, a band that, like recently?
I guess any band over the years really, you know, surprised you when you got to see them live.
Well, I saw the first rehearsal of Thin Lizzy with Ricky Warwick, and that was with with Vivian Campbell. The only time he played, they had I know the manager Adam very well, and they had a rehearsal party, you know, with a very close party at Maid's, and they just sounded unbelievable. And that really surprised me, because I didn't know what to expect. I know Ricky was a fantastic singer, and I couldn't believe how great he you know, sang the Phil stuff, and the whole band, you know, it was a dual guitar player. And like I said, Vivian was playing, and just killer. That was cool. A band that actually blew me away, I saw I think it might have been their first LA show at the Troubadour, was the Struts. And I had heard their songs afterwards, you know, on vinyl, and wasn't that, or I'm still saying vinyl, or just studio tracks, and wasn't that thrilled. But I remember seeing them live, and I knew I went with my buddy Jonas Auckland, who directed their video, big video director, and he invited me. And I heard of the band. Oh, that band from England. Yeah, I heard of them. And he goes, yeah, they got they're all young kids, but they're all into Slade and early Queen and Status Quo and all this stuff. So I checked them out, and live, that singer had so much charisma, and I was like, God damn, these guys are really good. I mean, for being as young as they were, they just commanded the stage like those old 70s bands, and they had tons of kids that I had, the place was packed with young kids just getting into it, tons of girls, and he looked like Freddie Mercury from the Sheer Heart Attack record with the hair, and he had that charisma. I was like, God damn, these guys got it right. And I really dug them. And again, after hearing their music, I thought they had some really good songs. I mean, they weren't real heavy, but live, they really blew me away. I was like, wow, they really, know how to capture an audience, in the same way, Bruce Dickinson, a frontman, does. This frontman definitely had charisma. Good band. But yeah, something that was really shocking was the first time I saw System of a Down in the clubs. Because I had heard about them. I saw them very, very early on. And, my friend I'm Armenian, and my friend from Armenia, did you hear this band? And everyone's saying, oh, they're from Armenia. They come over from our System of a Down. They're playing the LA scene. I'm like, bullshit. You're kidding. You're fucking with me. He goes, no. They're like supposed to be, they're like really heavy, like industrial or what, I don't know how to describe it. I'll go see them. And I remember seeing them. This is when Serge had like this real long hair. He looked like, Manson, just crazed look, and they came up on stage, and it was like, what the fuck is this? It was like, wow, these guys are definitely different, and I didn't really know what to think. It was like, and I'm thinking at the time, these guys are great, but they'll never get big because they're just too, they'll never get, mainstream with, on a major level. I figure maybe they'll have like a huge underground, following, but, this shit is just too weird because they were really, going off on some weird shit then. But it was like, man, the crowd, and it was funny because it was like probably, I could tell it was like about 80 or 90% Armenians, like friends of theirs. They were just going nuts, man. The place was packed. And, this is before no one, before they even had their demos out and stuff. And it was like, wow. So that was pretty impressive. And it, kind of brought me back, the first times I saw Armored Saint in the clubs, and, Metallica and all these, early bands, at the clubs. It was kind of that feeling like, wow, this is something different, But yeah, so I would say that,
Cool. Seems like you've answered the question, because that's the response was thanks. That's exactly what I was asking. So cool. Yeah. Awesome. Before wrapping things up here, where should people go to pick up Bay Area Godfathers?
I always say Amazon. Did you get it through Amazon through Spain? Yeah, that's always the easiest way.
It's sold out here. I don't know if that's because they haven't started selling it, so I had to purchase it through the U.S. site.
Okay, yeah, that's usually the best because they're really good and they ship it very quick. And if you're an Amazon Prime member, you get free shipping, and they usually have a good cost. So for the actual DVD, I would go there. I think like Walmart.com, BestBuy.com, a lot of those. If you have a local record store near you that carries it, definitely I encourage you to support, your local record store if you could get it. The Metal Rock site, I've had emails saying I think you can still get it at metalrockfilms.com. Look it up, but I know Warren doesn't always keep it. The site itself current. So I can't tell you if they're have the DVDs in stock through there, but my best bet is Amazon.
Okay. And some of the other documentaries you've worked on are on streaming right now as well.
Yeah. Band vs. Brand is a great film about the music business. I don't know if you had a chance to watch that one. That's through Cleopatra Entertainment, and you could get that at you could stream that on Vudu, on Amazon Prime, and Google Play, YouTube, for I think like $3.99. I think a lot of them are free with ads too, and I think they Tubi too has some of those on there as well. So yeah, definitely check that out. Band vs. Brand. Okay, good movie, good documentary.
Awesome. And as far as the podcast, best place for people to hook up and find out what the podcast is all about? Should they go to the CMSDN now, or okay?
Well, I mean, I always say it's easier to say Shockwaves Skull Sessions.com.
Okay, awesome.
That'll take you right to the Shockwaves Skull Sessions page, and then you could go on from there. And if you want to check out, we've got a network. Obviously the classic metal show, Aftershocks. I don't know if Talk to Me's still on there. I know Joshua's leaving. He's doing something with Knotfest now.
Yeah.
So we congratulate him for that. But he just brought in a new something. I can't remember the name. It's a Dream Theater podcast with John Drake that I think just got on there as well. And Poppet's Corner, Tanner Poppet, great dude.
Yes.
So we got that. And maybe we should, I should talk to him about getting Mars Attacks on there too.
Well, I'm always willing to have people check my stuff out. So, I was trying to look up on my phone real quick. The Dream Theater podcast is, I think, Edge of Infinity or something like that, or something to Infinity. And I know it refers to Dream Theater. So,
yeah, exactly.
So, Bob, I want to thank you for spending the last hour with us here. As always, it's a lot of fun. As Jeremy just said, the hour went by real quick because it's always a great conversation, a great, chat with you. So,
dude,
anytime you have anything to promote, I'm more than the door's always open for you here. We always love.
Same with me for the Skull Sessions. We'll, if we could get another good topic we could discuss and maybe get a couple people on to discuss it with you, that would be great. I'd love to get you back on the show.
Awesome. Would love to do it.
So, hey, I want to thank all the people in the chat room as well. I've been reading some of the chats. You guys were all very nice, and I really appreciate all the nice compliments you gave me. So,
yeah, they're always great. So, I'm lucky to have these guys chiming in every Friday. It amazes me that people want to spend this Friday with me. An hour on Friday, but it's always cool to have these people.
So it's pretty late at night your time now, huh?
It's a little after 1 a.m. I'm 9 hours ahead of you.
Wow, you got some really hardcore fans there staying up late. Nice.
Well, most of these people are on the East Coast, actually. We have, Jeremy's in the UK. Brad, who chimes in as well, he's out in Utah. I saw, I forget his, Jonas, I believe is his name, or Jonas Endelman in Sweden. And Chris
like my old Silver
Tennessee
t-shirt. Jonas Hansen's.
Oh.
Remember Silver Mountain, the old Swedish band? Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
that's for you, Jonas.
Armored
Saint. There you go. Right on.
You were coming on, so I said I got to wear the Armored Saint shirt. So,
well, Victor, again, it was a total pleasure, and we will do it again soon.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. That was my interview with Mr. Bob Nalbandian. I want to thank him for the time he spent. I want to thank you guys for the time in the chat. A great Friday, a great conversation. Again, this is what I want the show to be about. It doesn't matter if it's the biggest person in rock or metal. I just want to sit down and hear some cool stories and have the participation from you guys. That was an awesome question by Art there. And some cool stuff came out. Bob told that great story about System of a Down. I mean, I can still remember hearing them on WSOU for the first time and thinking, what the hell is this? I heard Sugar for the first time. But after, getting to hear it, I realized, at least to me, I know they're not for everyone, the uniqueness and the genius behind them. So there you go. I need to raise my finger. Anyway, again, thanks for everyone that joined us in the chat. I know Rob had to jump out early. If he gets to listen to this in the chat, thank you for jumping in. Thanks again to Jeremy in the UK, Jose up in Connecticut, and Mr. Sinzak down there in Tennessee. Real quickly, I do want to thank all of my patrons who, again, not only do most of you guys join me here on the chat on Friday nights, I do want to thank you guys for backing what I do on Patreon and the feedback that you guys give me there as well. And the interaction is so cool. If you haven't checked it out, it is Patreon.com/Mars Attacks Podcast. It is a troll-free environment. It is a lot of video content every day, new bands, old bands. You get the Victor M. Ruiz podcast, which is me talking about metal news, hard rock and metal news. You also get the album of the week as well, where it's me doing an unboxing of vinyl for the next month of stuff that I've recently released. So most of the stuff is pretty current, although there's going to be a kind of swerve in the road. There are 2 reissues. One is a new reissue, but the other one is from a few years back. And there's going to be some distinct differences between what you guys, especially in the States, have seen. So I think some of you guys will be interested in it. So again, I want to jump in and just thank all the patrons real quick. Jeremy, Wellman in the UK. I mentioned you already. But Jerry from Long Island, who recently joined. Jose from Connecticut, who's in the chat. Thank you, sir, for joining. My Galaxy of Geeks co-host, Mr. Chris Vaglio. The Metal Dentist, Mr. Gabriel Ruiz. Talking Metal's own Mark Striegel. Yarg Metals, Brad Dahl, out there in Utah. Thank you, Brad, for the support. And actually, Brad has added a direct link to Mars Attacks right there on yargmetal.com. So check that out. I appreciate Brad doing that. I was checking his stream earlier this week, and there was a whole string of songs that were coming out back to back, and I was like, wow, this is so great. He had some Witherfall in there, and there was another track that came on right before that. I have to check Twitter. I forget what it was, but I remember it stood out to me as well. Thank you, Brad, for your support, and thank you for always coming on here and providing all of your great stories. So there you go. Mike Jones and Steve Hoker. So Mr. Hoker was shockingly enjoyed the new Dee Snider song because he is Mr. Sister or Mr. Twisted Sister, I should say, not Mr. Sister, because that's a whole topic of another conversation. But anyway, yeah. Thank you, Jose, for checking in. Hope you guys have a great weekend. Yes, you were saying that your wife is the coolest. And thank you, Paula, for the kind remarks. Mr. Dahl, you were saying that your brother, the CEO, deserves credit for that. Cool. I thank you, sir. I thank the Dahl brothers for that. So there you go. I'm going to post about all of the songs we are playing. You turned us on to Ozzy Tomorrow. Are you referring to? Oh yeah, it may have been Ozzy's Tomorrow. That's off of Osmosis. I love Osmosis. I know a lot of people always say, hey man, after No More Tears, he didn't put out anything good anymore. Osmosis is a tremendous album. My biggest issue is that I wish Steve Vai had recorded that. I was supposed to. Or, Ozzy Tomorrow, Blizzard of Oz. Brad, you can't imagine what a week it's been. So I completely forgot. Yes. Blizzard of Oz tomorrow. A bunch of us are speaking to Mark Striegel for his Patreon about Blizzard of Oz. And I was thinking that I had to share my Chris Sangarides story, but the last time I did that on his Patreon, somebody jumped out at me saying that they hated Chris Sangarides' work. And I said, even Painkiller by Judas Priest? And they said, yep, even that. So Yeah, and the other thing that Brad is saying, Steve Vai did the whole album with Ozzy, and only the Jack song made it. Yeah, My Little Man. The thing that sucks is that they put that on the Prince of Darkness box set, where you have Jerry Cantrell from Alice in Chains playing on it, and they didn't even put that version on there. Like, I don't know if they couldn't clear it or what the story was, but man, that would have been so cool. I think a lot of these artists missed the mark by not including some of these special, like, unreleased things that we've been reading about for so many years. That would have been so awesome just to hear those Vi songs, even if it's just in the demo format. You know, people would just go out and buy that. Listen to the Gene Simmons, The Vault. Or was that called The Vault? Whatever that suitcase was that he put together. I apologize. The songs, the demos that he has with the Van Halen brothers on that. Tunnel of Love, Love 'Em and Leave 'Em, and is it, it's Calling Dr. Love, I believe. Sorry, again, long week. So my brain isn't working as well as it should. But anyway, just always raises my goosebumps listening to that, because it's just so cool to think that's Gene Simmons, that's Alex Van Halen, and that's Eddie Van Halen playing songs that, you know, Kiss ultimately did. Yeah, Jeremy is confirming The Vault. Thank you, sir. So anyway, again, thank you greatly for everyone that has decided to spend this hour plus with us tonight. Thank you to anyone who listens to the replay. I appreciate your time. And Victor needs more sleep. Are there 28 hours in the day? Can somebody arrange that? But anyway, yeah. Thank you, guys. If not, I'm going to be thanking for the next 4 or 5 hours here, but thanks tremendously. I really appreciate it. And again, if you can help out in the with the Patreon, $2 gets you in. If not, just share, like. When I do interviews with artists, tag them. Say, hey, great episode with Victor. Great episode on Mars Attacks. That goes a long way to helping me secure other interviews and to get people to take notice and say, hey, we know who he is outside of Estonia. So, interesting fact. The finger, not the pen. Statistics show that Mars Attacks is in the top 10 most listened to music podcasts in the world, which is absolutely awesome. And that couldn't happen without you guys. So again, thank you. Thank you for everything, guys. And we will see you next week right here on the Signals from Mars live stream. And if you're listening to the podcast version on this, the Mars Attacks podcast. See ya. I got to pull the graphic up before I say that. Where are we going? Here we go. See ya.